My name is Mia, and for all 32 years of my life, I've been the responsible one. It's not just a label. It's been my function, my entire identity within my own family. In my professional life, I'm a forensic accountant. I live in a world of spreadsheets, ledgers, and the cold, hard certainty of numbers. Numbers don't lie. They don't have feelings, they don't make excuses, and they can't be manipulated by a tearful plea. For my family, however, my life of careful calculation and diligent saving meant only one thing. I was the emergency fund. I was the safety net for my younger sister, Camila, whose life was a whirlwind of impulse buys, fleeting passions, and extravagant dreams, all subsidized by our parents. They convinced me, with a masterful performance of love and desperation, to co-sign a massive loan for her dream wedding, a fairy tale affair she simply couldn't live without. They swore on their lives, on our family bond, that they would cover every single penny. Of course, they defaulted. And just like that, their dream wedding became my living nightmare, leaving me on the verge of total financial ruin. To save myself, I had no choice but to do the one thing I do better than anyone else. I audited them. And what I found buried in their carefully constructed facade of financial struggle was a secret that would shatter our family forever. I never thought my sister's rehearsal dinner, a night supposed to be filled with love and happy toasts, would become the venue for the most important and most brutal audit of my life. Before I dive into how I turned a spreadsheet into an instrument of personal justice, I'd love to know where all of you are watching from today. Let me know down in the comments. And if you've ever been the responsible one in your family, the one everyone turns to when things go wrong, go ahead and hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. And for all the new viewers here, make sure you subscribe to join this incredible community of people who understand that sometimes standing up for yourself is the hardest battle you'll ever fight. My role as the family's resident grown-up started early. I have a distinct memory from my 8th birthday. I'd spent months saving my allowance, $5 a week, to buy a beautiful, intricate model of the solar system. It had tiny, hand-painted planets that spun on delicate wire orbits. I treasured it. Camila, who was 5, was fascinated by it. One afternoon, while I was at a friend's house, her fascination turned destructive. She wanted to see if Mars could fly. It couldn't. Neither could Saturn. I came home to find my beautiful model in pieces on the floor, the delicate wires bent and broken. I was heartbroken. When my parents got home, I showed them the wreckage, tears streaming down my face. My mother sighed, a sound of pure weariness that I would come to know intimately. My father knelt, but not to comfort me. He gathered Camila into his arms. "She didn't mean it, Mia," my mother said, her voice already taking on a placating tone. "She's just a little girl." Camila was sobbing, but her tears seemed to be for having been caught, not for what she'd done. The final verdict was something that would set the precedent for the next 2 decades. "You know how she is," my father said, stroking Camila's hair. "You're the older sister. You should have put it somewhere higher where she couldn't reach it. Why don't you apologize to her for making her upset?" I stood there, stunned into silence, my throat tight with a confusion, so profound it felt like a physical ache. Apologize? For what? For owning something beautiful? For her breaking it? But I did. I mumbled an apology to my crying sister, the broken pieces of my planetarium at my feet like a tiny, personal solar system that had collapsed in on itself. My father then gave me $10 from his wallet. "Here," he said, not unkindly. "Go buy yourself another one." He didn't understand that it wasn't about the money. It was never about the money. It was about the principle, a concept that seemed to exist in a completely different language from the one my family spoke. This pattern repeated itself endlessly, in ways big and small. When I was 16, I worked 40-hour weeks all summer at a local grocery store, the smell of pine-sol and stale bread clinging to my clothes, just to save up enough money for a school trip to Washington, D.C. I wanted to see the monuments, to walk the halls of the Smithsonian. It felt important. That same summer, Camila decided she wanted to go to a prestigious cheerleading camp in another state. There was no discussion of her getting a job. My parents took out a small loan, patting her on the head and telling her to have the time of her life. When I quietly mentioned that my trip was an educational opportunity, my mother waved her hand dismissively. That's nice, honey, but this is important for Camila's social development. You're so smart already. You can just read about the museums in a book. Her words didn't feel malicious, which was somehow worse. They were just a statement of fact, a reflection of the family's established reality. Mia is practical and self-sufficient. Camila is special and needs to be cultivated. I went on my trip, paid for with my own sweat and exhaustion, and I loved every minute of it. But a small, bitter seed had been planted. I started to see my self-sufficiency not as a strength, but as a liability, a reason for them to expect everything from me and give nothing in return. My career choice was a direct reaction to the financial chaos I saw as a constant undercurrent in our home. My parents were always stressed about money, always complaining about bills, always just one unexpected expense away from disaster. Or so they said. I chose forensic accounting because it was the opposite of that chaos. It was about order, truth, and accountability. There was a right and a wrong, a balanced sheet and an imbalanced one. I loved the clean, irrefutable logic of it. Naturally, I became the family's unpaid financial advisor. Every year, I'd spend a full weekend doing their taxes, sorting through a shoebox full of crumpled receipts and half-understood bank statements. "Oh, Mia, you're a lifesaver," my mother would say, handing me a lukewarm cup of coffee. "I don't know what we'd do without you. Your father and I, our heads just spin with all these numbers." I never charged them. It was my duty. It was what the responsible one did. During those sessions, I started to notice things. Small inconsistencies. A weekend trip to a vineyard they claimed was a cheap getaway that had a credit card charge of over $1,000. A department store bill that was far too high for a family that was barely scraping by. When I gently questioned it, they had ready-made answers. "Oh, that was an emergency. Your father's suit for that wedding." Or, "That was points, honey. We used credit card points." They were plausible enough, and I wanted to believe them. I wanted to believe that they were trying, that they were just bad with money, not deliberately deceitful. Looking back, I can see I was auditing them with my heart, not my head. I was willfully ignoring the red flags because acknowledging them would have meant acknowledging a much more painful truth about my place in the family. My professional life, in stark contrast, was a haven of logic and respect. I worked at a mid-sized firm in the city, and I had a mentor, a senior partner named Mark. He was everything my father wasn't. Steady, logical, and someone who saw my skills as a valuable asset, not a free utility. He had a dry sense of humor and an almost supernatural ability to spot a doctored invoice from 50 paces. "Flores," he'd say, leaning over my desk and pointing a finger at my screen. "You have a gift. You don't just see the numbers. You see the story they're telling. Don't ever let anyone convince you that's not a superpower." His praise was like water in a desert. It was the only place in my life where my meticulous nature was celebrated. He would often see the strain on my face after a weekend spent with my family. "Everything all right, Mia?" he asked once, after I'd come in looking particularly worn down. I'd just spent 2 days helping my parents navigate a supposed crisis with their car insurance, which turned out to be a problem of their own making from missing payments. I gave him a weak smile. "Just family stuff." He nodded slowly, his eyes full of a knowing sort of sympathy. "Family can be the most complex account to balance," he said. "Sometimes, the liabilities are emotional, not financial. Be careful where you invest." I didn't fully understand the weight of his words then, but I would soon. The catalyst for my ruin and my eventual liberation arrived in the form of a 2-carat diamond ring. Camila got engaged. Her fiancé, Julian, was exactly the kind of man you'd expect her to choose. He was impossibly handsome, worked in some vague but lucrative-sounding tech bro job, and had a smile so dazzling it seemed to deflect any serious questions. He was less a person and more an accessory, the perfect male counterpart to Camila's influencer aspirant lifestyle. They were a beautiful, vapid, and utterly captivating couple. And they wanted a wedding to match. The wedding plans were not just extravagant, they were a fantasy made real. A historic country club venue. A guest list of 300 people. A celebrity florist. A custom-designed gown that cost more than my car. When I first heard the details, I felt a familiar sense of dread mixed with resignation. "How are you going to pay for all this?" I asked Camila over coffee, trying to sound casual. She just waved her perfectly manicured hand. Oh, Julian's family is chipping in and Mom and Dad are handling the rest. They want me to have my perfect day. She said it with such breezy entitlement, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. A week later, my parents asked me to come over for dinner. The request had a formal, ominous tone. I arrived to find them looking grave. The air in their house was thick with manufactured crisis. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed, and my father was pacing the living room. They sat me down on the couch, the same couch where I'd been lectured about the broken planetarium all those years ago. Mia, my mother began, her voice trembling. We're in trouble. Deep trouble. She then launched into a long, convoluted story about a bad investment, a sudden drop in my father's pension value, and unexpected medical bills. It was a masterpiece of financial fiction, filled with just enough plausible details to sound convincing to a layperson. But to me, a forensic accountant, it was full of holes. Yet I listened. The wedding, my father cut in, his voice heavy with shame. We promised Camila. We can't take that away from her. The deposits are all paid. We'd be humiliated. She would be devastated. This was the moment. This was the pitch. They laid it on thick, painting a picture of social ruin and a heartbroken daughter. They weren't just asking for money. They were asking me to absorb the consequences of their irresponsibility. They wanted me to be their financial sin-eater. There's a loan, my mother said, her voice dropping to a whisper. A signature loan. We've been approved, but our credit isn't strong enough on its own. The bank needs a cosigner. I felt the blood drain from my face. I knew what they were asking. It was the one line I had sworn to myself I would never, ever cross. No, I said, the word feeling foreign and sharp in my mouth. I can't. It's too much. It's financial suicide. The tears started then, right on cue. Camila had been called in for the final act. She sat next to me, her beautiful face crumpled in distress. Mia, please, she sobbed, grabbing my hand. It's my one day. My perfect day. Don't let them take it away from me. I'll pay you back, I swear. I'll get a job after the wedding. We'll all pay it back. Her pleas were interwoven with my mother's weeping and my father's heavy, disappointed sighs. It was a symphony of manipulation, and I was the sole audience. My father played the grand finale. He put his hand on my shoulder, his expression one of pained sincerity. Mia, look at me, he said, his voice low and earnest. I will make the payments myself. I'll move money from my pension. You will not see a single bill. You won't have to pay 1 cent. This is on my honor as your father. He looked me right in the eye. And in that moment, the desperate little girl inside me, the one who just wanted her dad to be proud, the one who craved their approval more than she valued her own security, won the battle. I ignored every screaming alarm bell in my head, every lesson my career had taught me. I ignored Mark's sage advice about emotional liabilities. I looked at their 3 pleading faces, and I saw a family that needed me. I thought, this is it. This is the grand gesture that will finally make them see my worth. When I save them, they'll finally truly appreciate me. It was the single most expensive thought of my life. The next day, I walked into the bank with them, my hand shaking as I signed the papers. I had just co-signed a loan for $250,000. I had just handed my family the keys to my own destruction. The first few months after I co-signed the loan were deceptively calm. The funds were dispersed, the vendors for the wedding were paid, and my family treated me with a cloying, saccharine sweetness that should have been my first major warning. Camila would send me pictures of her dress fittings and cake tastings with captions like, "Making my dreams come true. All thanks to you. Best big sister ever." My mother would call me just to say she loved me, something she hadn't done spontaneously in years. My father would clap me on the back and call me his rock. I was swimming in the warm, intoxicating waters of their approval, and it felt so good that I ignored the shark circling beneath the surface. I allowed myself to believe their promises. I pushed the staggering reality of that loan to the back of my mind, labeling it as handled. The first payment notification arrived in my inbox exactly 30 days later. It was a standard automated email from the bank, a courtesy reminder that the first installment of $5,200 was due in a week. I forwarded it to my father with a simple note, FYI. He replied almost immediately. Got it, honey. All taken care of. A week passed. I received another email, this time more direct. Your payment is now past due. A knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. I called my dad. Oh, damn it, he said, his voice full of convincing frustration. The pension transfer is taking longer than they said. Bureaucratic nonsense. Don't you worry, I'll go down to the bank tomorrow and sort it out. I'll pay the late fee. I wanted to believe him. It was easier to believe him. So I did. I told myself these things happen. Meanwhile, Camila's social media was a non-stop highlight reel of pre-wedding extravagance. There was the bachelorette weekend in Miami, complete with yacht photos and champagne towers. There were the weekly spa days with her bridesmaids, the his and hers designer luggage they bought for their honeymoon in the Maldives, the endless stream of photos from high-end restaurants where she and Julian were celebrating their impending nuptials. Every post was a tiny, sharp jab at my growing unease. I'd look at a picture of her sipping a cocktail on a rooftop bar, the caption reading, "Living my best life," and then I'd look at the second past due notice from the bank, which had now arrived in the mail, the red ink on the envelope feeling like a brand. The disconnect was jarring, dizzying. They were living a life of boundless luxury on a loan that was rapidly becoming a lead weight around my neck. When the second payment was missed, the bank's tone shifted from polite reminders to firm demands. I started getting phone calls. First, from a pleasant-sounding woman in the lending department. The second time, from a grim-voiced man in collections. Miss Flores, he said, his voice devoid of any warmth. As the co-signer, you are equally and fully responsible for this debt. The loan is now 60 days in arrears, and it's beginning to impact your credit score. Hearing those words felt like a physical blow. My credit score. I had cultivated my 800-plus score with the same meticulous care that a gardener tends to a prized orchid. It was a reflection of my entire ethos. I was reliable. I was trustworthy. I paid my debts. And now, because of them, it was being poisoned. I called my parents, my voice shaking with a fury I could barely contain. The excuses were becoming more and more threadbare. The market took a downturn, Mia. The pension isn't what it was. My father tried to explain, his voice slick with evasion. But we're working on it. We're trying to move some things around. Move what around? I demanded. What things? You told me you were broke. What assets are you suddenly moving? He stammered, unable to give me a straight answer. My mother got on the phone, her voice dripping with manufactured pathos. Mia, please don't add to our stress. We feel terrible enough as it is. We had a sudden medical expense, a big one. A lie. I knew it was a lie. My aunt had told me just a week earlier that they were both in perfect health. The lies were so blatant now, so disrespectful in their laziness. They weren't even trying to make them believable anymore. They simply expected me to swallow them. That was my role. The final straw came in the form of a thick, certified letter from the bank's legal department. It stated, in cold, unforgiving legal jargon, that the loan was in default. If the full past due amount of over $15,000 wasn't paid within 30 days, they would accelerate the debt, meaning the entire $250,000 balance would become immediately due and payable. If it wasn't paid, they would begin legal proceedings to garnish my wages and place liens on my assets. My assets. My carefully saved down payment for a condo. My retirement accounts. My entire future. I read the letter 3 times, the words blurring through a haze of panic. I felt like I was drowning. I couldn't breathe. My carefully constructed world, built on a foundation of responsibility and planning, was about to be swept away by a tidal wave of their deceit. I stumbled into work the next day feeling like a ghost. I couldn't focus on my own accounts. The numbers on my screen swam before my eyes. I felt a deep, chilling shame. I, Mia Flores, the forensic accountant who could spot a phantom employee on a payroll from a mile away, had fallen for the most basic, most emotionally driven fraud imaginable. Mark found me in the break room, staring blankly at a coffee I hadn't touched. He sat down opposite me, his expression gentle. "Talk to me, Mia," he said softly. "This is more than just family stuff, isn't it?" And for the first time, I let it all out. The story poured out of me in a torrent of shame and fear. The wedding, the loan, the lies, the default notice. I expected him to judge me, to tell me how foolish I'd been. But he just listened, his gaze steady and unwavering. When I was finished, my voice hoarse, he was silent for a long moment. Then he leaned forward. "They committed fraud, Mia," he said, his voice low and firm. "They misrepresented their financial situation to induce you to sign. That's the textbook definition of fraudulent inducement." He paused. Then his eyes sharpened with a familiar, professional intensity. "You are a forensic accountant. One of the best I've ever seen. You know what to do. Stop acting like their daughter. Stop acting like the victim. Start acting like the professional you are. Treat your family as a hostile client. Audit them. Find the truth. The numbers will tell you the story, and the story will be your weapon." His words cut through my panic like a laser. He was right. I had been so paralyzed by the emotional betrayal that I had completely forgotten about my professional arsenal. I was an expert at uncovering financial deception. Why was I letting them be the one exception? That afternoon, a cold, hard resolve settled over me. The fear and hurt were still there, but now they were fueling something else, a quiet, methodical rage. I was done being their safety net. I was done being their fool. I was going to save myself, and I was going to do it using the very skills they had always taken for granted. The audit of Flores, and Flores was officially underway. That night, I didn't sleep. I went home and turned my spare bedroom into a war room. I dug out the old tax files I had from my parents, the ones they'd so gratefully handed over for years. I still had the login credentials for their online banking portal, a convenience they'd insisted I have in case of an emergency. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. I logged in. The first thing I did was download 5 years' worth of statements for every account they had, checking, savings, credit cards. As a cosigner on the defaulted loan, I knew I also had a legal right to request information directly related to their financial standing. I was no longer just their daughter. I was a creditor. I fired up a new spreadsheet, the clean, empty grid a calming sight in the midst of my emotional chaos. I started the painstaking work of data entry, line by line. I worked with a furious, focused energy I hadn't felt in weeks. This wasn't just a job. It was an exorcism. With every transaction I logged, I felt a little bit of the fog of their manipulation lifting. I created columns for dates, amounts, vendors, and categories. A story began to take shape, a narrative of breathtaking hypocrisy. There were the monthly payments for a luxury SUV, the one my dad claimed he got a fantastic deal on. There were recurring charges for a high-end golf club membership, the one my mother said was a business necessity for my father. There were thousands of dollars spent on designer clothes from boutiques, not department store sales racks. I cross-referenced their spending with Camila's social media. A post from her about a surprise weekend getaway to Napa from her parents corresponded perfectly with a $2,000 charge at a boutique hotel and several $100s at various wineries. All of this while they were supposedly eating canned soup to save money. The picture was clear. They weren't just bad with money. They were liars. They were living a life far beyond their declared means, and they were using me to plug the gaps when their charade became too expensive to maintain. But there was still a piece missing. Even with their extravagant spending, the numbers didn't fully add up. Their declared income, my father's pension and my mother's part-time job at a local library, couldn't support this level of sustained financial leakage. There had to be another source of funds, a secret income stream they had hidden from me, their personal tax preparer. I started digging deeper, moving beyond bank statements into public records. I searched for property records, business filings, anything under their names that I didn't know about. Nothing. I was hitting a wall, and the frustration was mounting. I decided to take a different tack. I started looking at my maternal grandmother's estate. She had passed away 10 years ago, leaving behind a modest inheritance that my mother had claimed was all but gone after settling her debts. I still had a copy of the will from when I helped my mother with the probate paperwork. I scanned the dense legal document again, my eyes catching on a clause I had barely registered at the time. It mentioned the establishment of a trust. I remembered my mother dismissing it as just some legal thing for the lawyers. I pulled on that thread. Using a professional database I had access to at work, I began searching for registered trusts under my family's names. And then I found it. It was like a thunderclap in the silent room. The Camila Flores Sunshine Trust. It was established by my grandmother, with my parents named as the sole trustees. My heart hammered against my ribs. I paid the fee for a digital copy of the full trust document and read it with a feeling of dawning horror. The trust had been seeded with $500,000 from my grandmother's life insurance policy. Its terms were explicit. The funds were to be used for the health, education, and well-being of her granddaughter, Camila Flores. It was supposed to be for her college tuition, a down payment on a house, or genuine medical emergencies. It was not a slush fund for handbags and vacations. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. I logged back into their banking portal, and this time I knew what to look for. I found a separate savings account I'd never seen before, an account they had deliberately never shown me. Its name, CF Sunshine. They had been making regular, five-figure transfers from the main trust bank to this personal account, and then spending it freely. They had been systematically draining their own daughter's inheritance for years, using it to fund their lifestyle and her whims, all while pleading poverty to me. This wasn't just a lie. This was a sophisticated, long-term, and utterly despicable fraud. And they had used my love and my sense of duty to make me an unwitting accomplice in their scheme, using my good credit to finance a wedding they could have easily paid for themselves. The hurt I felt was immense, a vast, cold ocean. But for the first time, it wasn't pulling me under. Instead, I felt a strange, buoyant calm. I had the truth. I had the evidence. And I knew exactly what I was going to do with it. The week leading up to the rehearsal dinner was the calmest I had felt in months. The frantic panic had been replaced by a chillingly clear sense of purpose. I took 2 days off work, telling Mark I needed to prepare for a major presentation. It wasn't a lie. I spent those 2 days not in my office, but with a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman Mark had recommended who specialized in financial litigation. We went over every piece of evidence I had gathered, the bank statements, the credit card bills, the social media posts with timestamps, and the crown jewel, the trust document, paired with the statements from the CF Sunshine account showing the fraudulent transfers. The lawyer, a woman named Ms. Albright, looked at me over the top of her glasses, an expression of grim respect on her face. "Miss Flores," she said, her voice crisp. "This is one of the cleanest cases of fraudulent inducement and breach of fiduciary duty I have ever seen. You've done all the work. What is it exactly that you want from me?" "I don't want to sue them, not yet," I explained, my voice steady. "I want to give them one chance to make this right. I want you to help me draft a legally binding repayment agreement. A contract. It will stipulate that they are to assume full responsibility for the loan. The payments will be made from the trust, the way they should have been from the start, directly to the bank. It will also include a payment schedule to reimburse me for the damage to my credit and the emotional distress." I paused. "And I want it notarized. I want it to be an ironclad document." Ms. Albright raised an eyebrow. "And when do you plan on presenting this to them?" "Friday night," I said. "At the rehearsal dinner." A slow smile spread across her face. "Excellent," she murmured. "Maximum leverage." I spent the next day assembling my presentation. I didn't just print out documents. I curated them. I bought 3 high-quality leather binders, one for each of them, my mother, my father, and Camila. Inside, I organized the evidence with color-coded tabs, loan agreement, default notices, the trust, fraudulent expenditures, and finally, repayment contract. The fraudulent expenditures section was my masterpiece. I had paired every lavish purchase with a screenshot of a text or email from them claiming poverty during the same time period. It was a devastating, undeniable timeline of their deceit. For the final touch, I created a simple, elegant PowerPoint slide. It wasn't cluttered with data. It was just a summary table with 3 columns, date, expense, and amount. It listed the top 10 most egregious expenditures they had made from the trust fund in the last year alone. It was clean, brutal, and irrefutable. I saved it on a small thumb drive that I clipped into my pocket. Friday evening arrived. The rehearsal dinner was being held in a private banquet hall at the most exclusive country club in the county. The room was a sea of pastel silks and dark suits, bathed in the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. A string quartet played softly in the corner. The air smelled of expensive perfume and freshly cut roses. My family was at the center of it all, playing their roles to perfection. My father, the proud patriarch, shaking hands and booming with laughter. My mother, the gracious hostess, fluttering from table to table, her smile as bright and brittle as spun sugar. And Camila. She was radiant, a princess in a white silk dress, holding court with her bridesmaids, Julian attached to her side like a handsome trophy. I walked in, and for a moment, the sheer cognitive dissonance of the scene almost buckled my knees. This entire palace of illusion was built on a foundation of my impending financial ruin. I took a deep breath, clutching the handle of my sleek, black leather briefcase. It felt heavier than it was, weighted with the truth. Camila saw me and waved me over, her smile wide and oblivious. "Mia, you're here. You look so serious in that suit. Come on, have some champagne." "I'm fine, Camila," I said, my voice even. "I'll just have some water for now." My mother glided over, adjusting a non-existent stray hair on my head. "Mia, darling, you must be so thrilled for your sister. Isn't this just a perfect evening?" "It's certainly an evening," I replied, my calm seeming to unnerve her slightly. She gave me a searching look, then was distracted by another guest. I found my assigned seat at the head table. I placed my briefcase on the floor beside me, took out the thumb drive, and discreetly walked over to the AV technician who was managing the slideshow of sappy photos of Camila and Julian. I handed him the drive. "There's one more slide I need you to add to the end of the loop," I said with a pleasant smile. "It's a surprise for the happy couple." He nodded and plugged it in without a second glance. Dinner was an exercise in supreme self-control. I ate my chicken. I smiled politely at the inane chatter. I watched my family bask in the glory of their lies. Finally, the clinking of a glass signaled the start of the toasts. Julian's father gave a stuffy, boring speech. One of the bridesmaids told a tearful, rambling story. And then, Julian's father, acting as the master of ceremonies, beamed at the head table. And now, a toast from the person who knows the bride better than anyone. Her big sister and maid of honor, Mia Flores. A polite ripple of applause went through the room. I stood up, my heart a steady, rhythmic drum against my ribs. I walked to the podium, leaving my champagne glass behind. I didn't pick up the microphone at first. I just stood there for a moment, letting the silence settle. Then I reached down and placed my briefcase on the lectern, the sound of the latches clicking open unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice clear and strong, amplified by the microphone. "Thank you all for being here to celebrate Camila and Julian. A wedding is a celebration of a union, a partnership built on trust, honesty, and shared responsibility. It's about building a future together. And futures, as I've recently been reminded, are expensive." A few nervous titters went through the crowd. My parents were smiling, assuming this was the start of a quirky accountant-themed joke. Camila looked at me, her head tilted, a little confused. I pulled out the 3 leather binders. "I'm not going to give a toast tonight," I continued, my voice losing its pleasantry and taking on a cold, professional edge. "Instead, I'm here to present a business proposal. A financial restructuring, if you will." I walked over to the head table. The smiles on my parents' faces had frozen, replaced by masks of confusion. I placed the first binder in front of my father, then the second in front of my mother. Finally, I placed the third in front of my sister. Her hand, which had been resting on Julian's, recoiled as if the leather were hot. "What is this, Mia?" my father asked, his voice a low growl. "That," I said, returning to the podium, "is a detailed audit of the Flores family finances, specifically concerning the $250,000 loan you fraudulently induced me to co-sign 3 months ago." A collective gasp went through the room. The string quartet faltered and fell silent. "It outlines the terms of the loan, the immediate default on your payment obligations, and the subsequent lies you told to conceal that default." I looked directly at my parents. "But it also contains a more interesting discovery. Open it to the tab labeled, 'The Trust.'" My mother's face went white. My father's jaw clenched. Camila just stared, her eyes wide with incomprehension. I announced to the silent, captive audience, the existence of the Camila Flora Sunshine Trust, established by our grandmother with an initial endowment of $500,000. A trust whose assets you, as trustees, have been systematically misappropriating for years to fund a lifestyle you couldn't afford, all while pleading poverty to me. In my pocket, I pressed the button on the small remote. On the large projector screen behind me, the slideshow of happy couples vanished. It was replaced by my simple, stark spreadsheet. A few highlights of your poverty are now on the screen for your review. The room was dead silent, save for the low hum of the air conditioning. Every eye was on the screen, reading the damning list. February, couples spa retreat, $3,500. April, vintage Rolex watch, $11,200. June, bachelorette weekend, Miami, $15,400. Each line item was a nail in their coffin. I saw Julian lean over to look at Camila's binder. I saw his face shift from confusion to shock, and then to a cold, hard fury. "This is not the time or place, Mia," my father hissed, his face turning a blotchy red. "This is the perfect time and the perfect place," I retorted, my voice ringing with authority. "You made this public by building this wedding on my credit and my future. I'm just balancing the books in a public forum." I pointed to the final tab in their binders. "In that binder, you will find a legally binding repayment plan, drafted by my lawyer. It stipulates the immediate assumption of the loan, with all future payments to be made from the trust. It also includes damages and a schedule for restoring my credit. You have 30 days to sign it and begin the payments. If you do not, the full contents of that binder will be forwarded to the IRS and the District Attorney's Office for felony fraud. The choice is yours." I turned my gaze to my sister, whose face was a mess of tears and disbelief. Then I looked at her fiancé. "And Julian," I said, my voice softening just a fraction, "for the sake of transparency, which is so important in a marriage, you should know that according to my audit, your fiancé's current net worth, when accounting for her share of this liability, is approximately negative $250,000. I wish you both a lifetime of happiness." I clicked the remote. The screen went black. I turned, walked away from the podium, picked up my briefcase, and strode out of the banquet hall without a single look back, the sound of utter chaos erupting behind me like a bomb I had just detonated. The heavy, soundproof doors of the banquet hall swung shut behind me, muffling the explosion of shouting and crying into a dull, distant roar. I didn't stop walking. I crossed the opulent lobby, my heels clicking a steady, resolute rhythm on the marble floor. I pushed through the grand entrance and into the cool night air, taking my first deep, clean breath in what felt like an eternity. I had expected to feel a surge of triumphant glee, a rush of adrenaline. Instead, what washed over me was a profound, bone-deep sense of quiet. It was the quiet of a fever breaking, the silence after a violent storm. It was the sound of being free. I saw a familiar car idling by the curb. Mark got out and opened the passenger door for me. He had insisted on being my getaway driver, waiting a discreet distance away. I had invited him to the dinner for moral support, but he'd politely declined, saying, "This is your moment, Mia. But I'll be there for the aftermath." I slid into the seat, the soft leather a comfort. He got back in and simply drove, not saying a word. We drove in silence for 10 minutes before he finally spoke. "So," he said, his eyes on the road, "how did the presentation go?" A small, genuine smile touched my lips for the first time that night. "I think the client understood the gravity of their financial exposure," I said. He chuckled, a low, warm sound. "I have no doubt. The immediate fallout was even more cataclysmic than I had imagined." My phone started vibrating in my purse with a frantic, desperate intensity. I ignored it. When I got home, I had 17 missed calls from my mother, my father, and various aunts and uncles who had been present. There was a string of venomous, hysterical text messages from Camila, a jumble of typos and accusations. Asterisk, "How could you do this to me? You ruined my life. I hate you, I hate you, I hate you." Asterisk. The next morning, the real consequences began to manifest. I received a call, but it wasn't from a family member. It was from Julian's mother. Her voice was arctic. She informed me, in no uncertain terms, that the wedding was off. Julian, it turned out, was not interested in marrying into a family embroiled in a fraud scandal, nor was he prepared to start his marriage $250,000 in the red. He had packed his bags and left the hotel suite that morning. Camila's perfect day, her perfect man, her perfect future, it had all evaporated overnight. Later that afternoon, a sobbing, barely coherent Camila called me. The rage was gone, replaced by a pathetic, wailing despair. "He's gone, Mia," she cried into the phone. "Julian's gone. He left me. My wedding is ruined. My life is over. And it's all your fault." "No, Camila," I said, my voice calm and devoid of the pity she was so used to hearing. "This is not my fault. This is the consequence of years of lies. Your lies. Mom and Dad's lies. The bill has finally come due." I could hear my mother in the background, telling Camila to hang up, that I was a monster. I ended the call. 2 days later, my father showed up at my apartment. He didn't knock. He pounded on the door with his fist, the sound echoing through my quiet hallway. I opened it and stood my ground, blocking the entrance. His face was a mask of fury, his eyes bloodshot. "You will stop this," he seethed, his voice low and menacing. "You will call off your lawyer. You will fix this with Julian's family. You are going to fix what you broke." "I broke nothing," I said, my voice as cold as ice. "I simply exposed what was already broken. You have 27 days left to sign the repayment plan, Dad. I suggest you and Mom spend less time trying to intimidate me and more time reading the fine print." He looked at me, truly looked at me, perhaps for the first time. He wasn't seeing his compliant, responsible daughter. He was seeing a stranger, a formidable adversary who wouldn't bend. The fury in his eyes flickered, replaced by a flicker of something else. Fear. He turned without another word and stormed away. The following weeks were a war of attrition. My mother called daily, alternating between tearful begging and vicious verbal attacks. "After everything we've done for you," she'd cry. "We gave you a roof over your head. We fed you." "Yes," I'd reply calmly. "You did the bare minimum required by law. That doesn't entitle you to commit felony fraud." I became an expert at holding boundaries, at saying no, at hanging up the phone. Each time I did it, the guilt lessened, and a feeling of solid, unshakable self-worth grew in its place. With 2 days to spare before the deadline, a FedEx package arrived at my door. It contained the repayment contract, signed and notarized by all three of them. I had won. A year passed. It was a year of reconstruction, both financially and emotionally. True to their word, forced by the legal document I held over their heads, my parents began the payments. The first check that went from their account directly to the loan servicer felt like a monumental victory. They had to sell their precious luxury SUV. My father had to cancel his golf club membership. They had to sell a small vacation property they'd secretly owned for years, another asset I had uncovered in my audit. The facade of their upper-middle-class life crumbled, revealing the shaky, debt-ridden foundation beneath. The shame of their public exposure was immense. They became reclusive, their social circle shattered. Camila, stripped of her fiancé and her trust fund, was forced into the real world for the first time in her life. She had to get a job. She started as a cashier at a high-end clothing boutique, the kind of place she used to shop at. She hated it. Her social media went silent for months. She had to move into a small, cramped apartment with 2 roommates. She was learning, the hard way, the value of $1 and the reality of living within one's means. As for me, I was thriving. The loan was being paid off on schedule, and my credit score was slowly but surely recovering. The experience had ignited something in me. I realized that my skills could be used not just to find problems, but to empower victims of financial deceit. I left my job, and Mark, inspired by my story, left with me. We pooled our resources and started our own firm, Flores and Albright Consulting. Ms. Albright joined us as a silent partner. We specialized in exactly what I had done to my own family, forensic accounting for cases of internal and familial fraud. We found our niche helping people who, like me, had been exploited by those they were supposed to trust the most. We were incredibly successful. I was finally using my superpower for good, And the professional validation was 1,000 times more satisfying than the crumbs of approval I used to beg for at my family's table. About 6 months into my new venture, I got a text from Camila. It just said, "Can we get coffee?" I was hesitant, but I agreed. We met at a neutral, quiet cafe. She looked different. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by a simple sweater and jeans. Her nails weren't perfectly manicured. Her face was less made up, and for the first time, I could see the faint dark circles under her eyes. She looked tired, but she also looked real. She stumbled through an apology, clumsy and unpracticed, but sincere. She apologized for the loan, for the lies, for a lifetime of taking me for granted. "I never understood," she said, her voice quiet. "I never understood what money meant because I never had to. I never saw you, Mia. I just saw what you could do for me. I'm so sorry." There were tears in her eyes, and for the first time, I believed they were genuine. It wasn't a full reconciliation, not yet. The wounds were too deep for that. But it was a start. It was a single, new brick laid on a foundation of truth. I never fully reconciled with my parents. They continued to make the payments, but they never apologized. In their minds, I was the one who had betrayed the family, not them. My mother sent me a birthday card. Inside she had written, "I hope you're happy now." I didn't open the next one. I realized that their love was, and always had been, entirely conditional. And I was no longer willing to meet their conditions. Looking back, the whole ordeal was the most painful and liberating experience of my life. The family I thought I had was an illusion, and losing it was devastating. But in its place, I built a life of my own making, based on my own terms. I discovered that my greatest strength was not my ability to be responsible for others, but my ability to be responsible for myself. The quiet, meticulous girl who just wanted her family's approval was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her own worth, a worth that didn't need to be co-signed by anyone. They thought my world was just about numbers, but they were wrong. It was about the truth. And in the end, the truth, as they say, really does set you free. Thank you so much for joining me and for listening to my story. The last couple of years have been a journey, and sharing it helps me see how far I've come. I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice to protect yourself, even if it meant upsetting people you loved? Share your story. This is a safe space to do so. Don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you, and please subscribe to the channel for more stories about finding your strength and standing in your truth. Remember, sometimes the people who underestimate you the most are the ones who give you the greatest power, the power to prove them wrong. Thank you for listening. I wish you all peace and strength on your own journeys.